So sorry, oh yeah, okay, it's already been done recording. Okay, we can start now.
Am I audible and visible?
Yes, you're audible and visible.
All right. Just to reiterate, my name's Ram. No preferred gender pronoun, POIs through voice. I will be taking you around the 5th to 6th minute. Okay, start in a bit. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The Olympics serve as the pinnacle of human achievement. But when those standing at the pedestal actively make lives worse for everyone else, we think ultimately those achievements are hollow and ought to be stripped away from them. We're very proud to propose 2 arguments in this speech. First, the IOC is justified in using the standard of bad behavior to strip awards. Secondly, stripping awards ensure a better sporting field. But before that, 2 points of context. First, what will the IOC likely consider bad behavior? First, I think it's blatantly criminal act. So for instance, Cleet Keller in joining the Capitol riots, where it is distinctly a crime. So laws that have a clear harm, so crimes that have a clear harm to other people and their rights, we think that is the standard. Secondly, I think broadly, we will follow the existing laws of the country that they reside in. Although in instances where it is clear that the law they broke is oppressive or unjust, we are fine to not punish them when it is clear it is not wrong. So for instance, an individual in the conservative community breaking an anti-LGBT law, we're fine with not punishing them in those instances. I think it's clear that it's not a crime in those instances. Why is this likely to be the manifestation of this policy? First, the IOC is unlikely to create immensely controversial verdicts because it's reliant on countries for support. Secondly, the vast majority of countries have baseline laws. Respect for everyone, anti-discrimination for protected attributes, and human rights. That is why it likely be the baseline metric. But lastly, there's going to be backlash in the instance where it is massively unfair. There will be boycotts, etc., something the Olympics does not want to incur. And as such, they're likely to be careful when they do this. What does opposition need to defend then? I think they'll have to allow individuals who have committed crime and acted massively bad behavior to keep their medals, to keep that position, and to keep that platform. That is the thing. That is the burden that they have to deal in this debate. First argument, the IOC is justified in using the standard to strip awards. The importance of this argument is that we will collapse the distinction and explain why bad behavior is analogous to compromising the integrity of the competition and therefore ought to be justified as a metric. 2 reasons. First reason, these people damage the comfort of other competitors, and that is for 2 distinct reasons. The first reason is that in instances where there's a blatant crime, so for instance, violence and assault, it damages the safety other athletes feel when they know they are competing with a criminal or they're competing with a violent individual. How does that manifest? That manifests in them being unwilling to interact with these people, them being wary whenever they compete with these people, them being unable to properly compete in their respective sporting field because they feel immense danger and they don't feel like their safety is assured on their side for the reason that they allow these individuals to compete in the first place. But secondly, in instances where it is, for instance, hate speech, it isn't violent acts, but it's things like discriminating against other individuals, where they clearly support blatant racism, such as Cleet Keller, or that they are vocal in their views against minorities, it harms those minorities who they compete with. How does that manifest? That manifests in African Americans when they know they are competing with Cleet Keller, who, based on their actions, look down on people like them. They feel immense amounts of discomfort, feel like this person is an affront to their identity, and as such feel like they cannot compete in that respective field properly. And this is very important because these individuals are already the most vulnerable. We think it's unfair to hold double jeopardy onto these individuals when they're already discriminated in status quo. What is the implication of this insofar as we've proven they already damage the integrity of the competition by virtue of their bad behavior? I think integrity is tied to the athletes because they constitute the sport. And insofar as it generates discomfort, lack of safety, and an overall inability to properly compete, we therefore think it's an affront to the integrity of the competition and makes it unfair in the same ways, for instance, PEDs make it unfair for those in the sporting field. So we think it's analogous and justified in this respect. But secondly, their platform leads to a worse perception of their sporting field. These individuals likely have a massive following for the reason that they have won awards, they have won medals, and as such, since they have won, they have gained international recognition and they're able to spread their views because they're more popular and they have greater recognition. two implications of this. The first is that when they are able to spread their views, when they're able to skirt accountability, the people who are likely to listen to that individual and follow that sport will likely share those same views. They will likely, at the very least, be introduced to those views and be more inclined to be receptive towards them, which leads to more toxic perceptions of that sport and fan bases that are more toxic that reside within that sporting field. But secondly, more and more individuals will see that that sport does not have integrity because they're actively hosting a criminal or a blatant racist, and as such, the perception of that sport gets worse. So for instance, when they see Cleet Keller still has those awards, they'll feel like the sporting field where he resides in is actively just toxic and is actively does not have integrity. What is the implication of this? I think integrity is tied to perception because inherently the metric of integrity is how much people perceive the sport as good, perceive the sport as clean and fair, and as such, whether they see an individual who's actively committed crimes against the state or have actively harmed minorities is still allowed to keep those medals. We think integrity is seen as non-existent for the vast majority of individuals, and integrity is inherently tied to perception. They might say there's still societal deterrence, legal enforcement, etc. Why is that not enough to hold these athletes accountable?
POI.
Quite simply, they have immense amounts of social and economic capital to insulate themselves from society shaming them from doing these acts or holding these views because they are seen as national heroes or because they can pay their way out of suits. As such, they are unable to be held accountable. And as such, we think bad behavior is analogous to destroying the integrity of the sport. Second argument, stripping awards ensure a better sporting field. The importance of this argument is quite clear. We protect the individuals within these fields and we ensure that they are better role models. Two reasons. Firstly, this is the maximum extent of deterrence because now we're able to ban these athletes. So the ability to ban these athletes is limited on their side of the house as well, right? You have to go through a process which takes comparatively longer than the stripping of a medal. So this uniquely allows a more expedient mechanism. So why does this deterrent outweigh people like Cleet Keller from actively harming individuals? Two reasons. The first reason is obviously they care about winning and their legacy as a whole. And insofar as the medal, which they've worked immensely hard for, is stripped away from them, they're unlikely to engage in these acts. But before I move on, I'll take a POI.
All the reasons you talk about as to why people look up to these athletes still exist. Do you think people stop supporting the athlete just because the medal is removed?
I think the medal signifies that they are still recognized as someone who is great, someone who is immensely popular. And as such, when you remove that, it's a signaling mechanism to make people say, we do not support this person. We think what they did was abhorrent and what they did actively damage the integrity of the field. But also, like that's kind of symmetric. It's unclear why you have an active harm on your side. But secondly, the nuance of Olympic athletes are that they're the best in the world and that dedicated their entire lives to the craft. When you force them into a dilemma of keeping their medals or speaking their mind, they're likely choose the former because as we demonstrate, they work immensely hard from them. What is the impact of this? We make them actively compromise. That looks like one less person harming others, but more importantly, note that the platform they have significantly boosts the legitimacy of harmful notions and harmful ideologies because they have that social and financial capital, because the people respect the medal that athlete holds. So when you take that away, you're more able to change people's perceptions. But even at their worst case, even if they are still racist, at the very least, it stops them from concretizing that racism, ensure that they don't harm other people. Secondly, quite simply, it ensures internal reforms within each country's Olympic committee because awards do generate more interest for sponsorships and subsidies and generate favor in public opinion. So therefore, they're likely to ensure that the people that the Olympic committees within each nation pick are people who don't have these views, are not likely to commit crimes, and they have more regulations to ensure that the role models that people look up to are not problematic and they aren't able to propagate these views. We think bad behavior is analogous to damaging the integrity of the sport, and we explain why there's pragmatic benefits once you strip them of their medals. I'm very proud to propose.
I thank the Prime Minister for that speech. Now calling on the Leader of Opposition. Here.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Yep. Just give me a moment to set up my timer. Also, give me a moment to check my virtual background. I have a good one. Hang on. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think when you see these achievements as being the pinnacle of, for example, like being the pinnacle of like your sport, I don't see how this is analogous to how you act in your daily life for a few reasons, right? But before I move on to my counter characterizations, they never really tell you how the IOC actually looks like in status quo, and they never really actually tell you what is likely to be like the outcome of these, right? But before that, I'll just like I'll just take down like this idea of like how there's going to be a double jeopardy and like how this is somehow analogous to like PEDs, right? We tell you that the discomfort that athletes feel if your metric is going to be things like breaking laws, for example, there are already checks and balances to prevent them from attending the competition in the very first place, right? If at a point at which they are like media attention has already shown these people to have like, for example, attended Capitol riots, I think there are already checks and balances in their countries to actually like put them in jail, for example, or put them in court at a point which they're just unable to attend these things in the first place, right? Like things like literally just being arrested for their crimes, right? And if you want to say that, oh, it's going to be like revealed after if it's going to be revealed like after the competition, then that doesn't really like your whole thing about like PEDs and like affecting people's performance just doesn't really make sense, right? But even if you want to buy this characterization, we tell you that this isn't something that is actually true, because you can say that, for example, a homophobic athlete, for example, is going to have worse performance if it's like somebody who's openly gay, like Tom Daley. It's going to be like it's going to be like competing, right? And as such, it's just going to be worse when you have to prove why that is also going to be something that you have to defend under your world, right? But secondly, we tell you also that like when you say that, oh, like law isn't going to be enough and like these people have social capital and people care about winning, you then have to prove to me why this medal is going to be something that has so much, like if you take away the power of this medal, then why is it then the future athletes are going to feel as though this power has so much, like this medal has so much power that they feel that as though like, oh, they have to like refrain from doing these things when they already have shown that like even like getting to the Olympics, which is already a huge achievement in itself, is not enough to discourage them from like expressing political views or personal views, right? A thing about like them saying that, oh, their law, like if the law is obviously oppressive and unjust, then why is this bad, right? We tell you that like in the like vast majority of cases, this is something that like because the Olympic is a global stage, you cannot prove to us why there's going to be something in black and white. Obviously, there are going to be some countries that say, oh, I don't want this to happen, like this law isn't oppressive in my state. Like we don't see why the IOC is going to be such a good actor in which they are able to make logical decisions. Well, and secondly, we tell you that like the immense amount of backlash from countries is going to be worse. More on that on my counter characterization, right? They tell you something about like how this person is going to damage the integrity of the field. We tell you that like if your integrity is going to be tied to the medal in itself, and like which is based on your merit in the sporting community, for example, that's going to be something very bad. Right? I'll take you at 5. But first of all, a few counter characterizations, right? We tell you that the IOC is one of the most corrupt bodies in sporting history, right? We tell you that they shouldn't be allowed to do these things, just like have to like strip awards at the point which they already have too much power, and when things like bribery exist, like even as so far as it's like bribery scandals have been a thing, even in Tokyo 2020, right? But we tell you that like it's also going to be worse under your side. Oh my god, wait, hang on. I spilled my coffee. Okay, sorry. I'm going to continue my timer now. Continuing in 3, 2, 1. We tell you also that status quo is going to be good enough anyway, because you're going to lose fans and media for like doing these things anyway, and like checks and balances do exist in society, right? We tell you that even if they do get a medal, their personal life is going to be put on blast. Well, what they do is like truly heinous, and like we like based on the characterization that, oh, like breaking laws or something is going to be like something that still allows them to compete in the Olympics, right? We tell you that even if you like say that, oh, it's going to be like symmetric, we tell you there's going to be so much better under our side, where you don't have this ability to say that like, oh, the reason why I lost fans, like these you don't have the ability for these athletes to then say, oh, the reason why I lost fans and media was because I lost the medal and not because of my actions in and of itself, right? It's because of the, for example, the media attention that's associated with getting a medal. We tell you that's going to be so much worse for like for their thought processes and like helping them like change their change themselves or like think about or reflect on their actions, right? This is something that's really good, right? First, what are the arguments I'm going to make to you? First of all, why is it principally unjustified, and why you cannot mix professional and personal life, right? We tell you like we tell you like bad behavior can just like range from like people just breaking federal law or like refusing to take media comments and purposes, but the overarching principle that you have to defend is that the overarching principle that you have to deny is that people deserve to be rewarded for how well they have done, right? Let me give you the intuition pump. For example, if you're a college student graduate who goes to jail, we tell you that your college degree does not get taken away even if your other liberties are limited because of the basis that you have worked hard for that college degree in the first place, right? We tell you there's something analogous to like the Olympics in the first place, right? We tell you that the backlash is good from society is going to be enough, and you not have to take away their merit in order for this to happen, right? We tell you that this taking away of like their medals is going to appear as though you are punishing them for the wrong wrong reasons, right? When they have trained their entire life, when their entire identity has revolved around being an athlete to the point where they have already reached the Olympics, where they have trained hard enough to reach the Olympics, we tell you that you cannot act in a way which is going to like discredit them for their merit in the sport, right? We tell you that you cannot say that like for example, the way that they act is going to be like worse off when the way that they act is going to be better when you do this, because it is just
Wait.
not something that you cannot mix, right? Before that, I will take a POI.
Your analogy is flat out wrong. Like, sure, a college student goes to jail, they still have a degree, but people don't care about the degree because there's a black record in Spain and they're unlikely to be employed. So it's untrue that there's a distinction between your personal and your professional life.
Yeah, but we tell you that analogy still exists on the outside when like people are like, for example, when people see these people at the Capitol riots and there's already social backlash, we think that there's like enough social backlash and that's enough of a punishment for the Olympics in itself. When you also have this social backlash for people who are like engaged in things like Capitol riots, we don't see why like you have to take away your college degree at the point it's just something that is now analogous to your medal, right? But secondly, in the argument, why the IOC sucks shit at being medal distributed, right? We tell you that bribery scandals have already existed even closely as like Tokyo 2020. We tell you that's going to be in the worst case the IOC using this gross amounts of power to then strip away medals from certain athletes, which is going to be bad for us, especially for minorities or like developing countries who do not have this ability to lobby for medals in the first place, or do not have the means to defend themselves from saying, oh, this is like a federal law that is like something that is legal outside, but like something that could like lead to public backlash on their side. It is not fair for you to say just because they are born to an oppressive country with these views, you have to defend why you are able to strip the medal from them at a point which like this is a global event and it's going to be so many athletes, right? You have to prove to us why, for example, things like progressive views are going to be something that like all athletes have the same amount of knowledge to, and that's something that's you have to prove, right? That's going to be good under your side, right? We tell you then you also cannot prove why these laws are going to be oppressive and just in the first place. It seems as though the IC is going to have the ability to dictate what is oppressive or not, and countries are going to be pissed off, right? We tell you that that's perception of the IC being corrupt and having so much power even under the best case like that is going to lead to a lot of athletes being mad, and we tell you that that's going to be more likely to say, oh, I lost it because like the IOC is corrupt and not necessarily because I'm a shitty person, right? But what happens even if you don't buy that the IOC is going to be worse off and it's going to be corrupt on the outside? We tell you that surveillance is going to be a huge thing. These retired teams are going to be surveilled constantly to see if they're complying to rules. The media now has a huge incentive to invade in people's privacy. Even long after they've retired, we tell you that the media now has more justification in telling them it's going to be worse, right? We tell you then, secondly, athletes are also more likely to change it when they're able to see that they lose media support simply because of their actions, right? And then the narrative of a medal being the one thing as showing your prowess in society and the success in your personal life, social approval, as seen like as opposed to the current narrative that you can be extremely shitty person and still have a medal, it's something that's going to be worse on your side. For all these reasons, very proud to oppose. Thank you.
I thank the leader of opposition for that speech. Just a general reminder for everyone, you can't randomly stop in the middle of your speech. The timer keeps going. Anyways, now calling on the Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
Hi. So my name is David. My preferred pronouns are he and they. I'll take you through voice. I'll take you before 6. Don't have to worry. Unless you want to badger me, I will mind. But you know, by virtue of me talking, I can't really interrupt. You know. Okay. I have a lot of people watching because they have novice quarterfinals later. I'm proud of you guys. Ali, Kiko, Kyle again, Neil, Naomi, Rain, Veronica. Okay. I'll be starting in 3, 2, and beyond all of the empty rhetoric that Elo gives you, their case quite clearly is uncomparative, and I'm going to explain that throughout my speech. But more importantly, it's just blatantly myopic, right? Like the first thing I want to point out is this claim that the IOC is corrupt. Like, yeah, sure, embezzling funds is symmetric, but giving and taking away medals is literally the most transparent thing in the world. Like, the point of the Olympics is fighting for medals. You have these things displayed on the scoreboards in literally every single, town in the world. You have these things published on every single public media site. They're unlikely to do this willy-nilly and strip the award of an individual unfairly. So obviously they will be met with immense scrutiny. But more importantly, individuals will be angry if they strip an award of a minority just because they are a minority. Quite obviously, they have the incentive to not be stupid, right? Like, it's unclear as to why they wouldn't have some serious discussion about this, especially given that there's no precedence for this. The second thing that they say is that there's backlash from athletes. I would just like to note that this is symmetric in status quo, because it is unclear why people aren't angry that a white supremacist still has a medal, but you get less backlash when the likely consensus that racism is bad is upheld. So if you want to claim that people don't agree that racism is bad, then I guess you'll just have to take this L in stride. The next thing that they say is that, media scrutinizes them more. It's unclear why this is bad, because we can uncover crimes they commit, which they have the capacity to hide and skirt away from. But the next thing I want to point out in terms of the frame and extraneous response before I get on to discussions is, what the hell is their comparative? Because it obviously cannot be individual countries, because they have an active incentive to shield their own athletes, because it's a stain on their international pride, and because, these individual athletes have their own capital to shield them from things like lawsuits, to shield them from things like any kind of, backlash from their own community. So it is unclear as to why leaving this to countries themselves is the tipping point to get your benefits. We would claim that the IOC is the best actor to do this because it has the most asymmetry towards these athletes compared to them within their home states. Three things in this speech. One, is this legitimate? Secondly, deterrence, and lastly, an extension. Firstly, is this legitimate? I would just like to note that they give a few claims. The first is that, why would they care about the medal? One, they are competing for the medal, something extremely exclusive. So, like, personally, as an athlete, this matters. Like, imagine working like 4, 5, 10 years and being stripped away of your medal. Obviously, this is something that they care about. Secondly, this impacts their legacy. So even if they don't care about this, in the short term, in the long term, they realize, I didn't win a fucking medal when I had the chance to, just because I actualized my own racism. It's unclear as to why they would think that myopically. Obviously, they care about this to a significant extent. The second thing they say is that, why would people stop supporting the athlete? They imply this in a POI. The first thing I'd like to note is that they try to make this a chicken and egg scenario. The important thing to note then is that people care about these athletes when they get medals. Like, it's unclear why people would significantly care about an athlete who didn't win anything. Like, the medal is the tipping point because it's the concrete signifier of an athlete's worth. Like, that's how I don't know any like Filipino Olympians over the past few years. I only know them because the media likes to spike them up. They like to give them a lot of clout because they won the medals, because they won them after such a long time. But secondly, let's be charitable. Even at worst, like people still support athletes. It's the fact that they get sponsorships from other companies because they see them as people who are worth investing in. It's the fact that they still have a lot of capital because a lot of people want to donate to them, like give them condominiums, but like give them a lot of property, like give them a lot of capital and money because they are seen as investments from these external actors. The last thing that they say under this is that there's an analogy, right? That a college student has a college degree even if they go to jail. The first thing I'd like to note, and this is rebuilding the POI, that this on face cannot be analogous, right? Like, firstly, there is no distinction between personal and professional in this instance because you have a stain on your record. Like, okay, maybe it won't affect you at school because you get the college degree. It affects you in your work. It affects you in, like, I don't know, graduate school. It affects you in all of the other aspects of your life. Secondly, probably nobody gives a shit about random college students under this analogy, right? But people do care about a literal public figure. People do respect the opinions that these public figures have, especially when they actualize these things in public discourse. And it's unclear as to why the extent to which this analogy works is symmetric. Obviously, the extent is much severe under the analogy of an Olympic athlete. But secondly, even if it's not on the basis of meritocracy, it should be on the basis of the harms on other people. And this is where I'll rebuild RAM. Because we said that this kind of behavior is actively opposed to integrity. The fact that it damages other people's safety and comfort. And that's really important, right? Because even if opposition claims it's not just about being safe, it is about feeling safe. So even if you at the very least feel unsafe, you get thrown off of your game. And that constitutes an unfair asymmetry, which directly compromises the kind of integrity that you want to defend under their side of the house. But we would know that it's worse perception of the sport as well, that people feel that the sport does not have integrity because they have someone who did some really bad shit and actively went and represented that sport in the Olympics. And that's something that they never respond to. But the third thing we say is that societal deterrence is not enough. Because the capital, they can get a good lawyer. Because of the social capital, they are heroes and they can get a mass support. And this is the weighing here. At worst for us, it is then a question of the externality it creates, such as the kind of effect that it has on other people, even if it's not unintended, such as the effects that it has on the social issues within these countries because they amass that social capital. And therefore, this is the most important because it's not only people from the minorities and people getting double jeopardy, like, imagine rising up their ranks in terms of socioeconomic capital, only to be given a spit to the face by allowing people who actively undermine your rights to compete. Like Elo just says that there are already checks and balances such as laws. The first thing to note is that this is factually untrue. Like Cleve Keller was able to go to the Olympics, and the reason for that is because of national pride. So they didn't want to have a stain on their record in the international scene, so they actively, protected them until they couldn't. The second thing, at worst, and this is already extremely generous, these athletes uniquely have capital, so they can get lesser sentences. They can get things like plea bargains. So obviously, this contention cannot fly. All of the harms and all of the benefits that Ram claims still stand, and they have to contend with that from the second speaker, or else they lose this debate outright. The conclusion to this is obviously this is legitimate because it does not only affect integrity, more importantly, it affects the externalities that we define. Next, on deterrence, and notably, they give no response. That's basically all of their positive material out. So I'm just going to be building a lot from Ram. So we explained this is the maximum extent of deterrence because of the things that I explained previously, that they care about these medals because they care about their legacy. But more importantly, and this adding more constructive, it ensures the internal reform within each country's Olympic committee, because awards garner more interest for sponsorship and subsidies than generate good public opinion, and therefore countries and their individual Olympic committees are likely to weed them out and not grant training to those who are likely to hold these views or likely to commit these crimes. But at the very least, you have regulations a lot more strict within these countries of Olympic communities. The impact of this is role model. So even if one person who is harmful slips through the cracks, it's the fact that a lot of people look up to these people. It's the fact that a lot of people look up to these by virtue of their achievements in the sport and surpasses the kinds of bad things that they did. We think that that is not acceptable. Lastly, on the culture of the sport. So notice that the Olympics is standing on thin ice at the moment because of things like COVID and running at a loss over the last few years because nobody wants to host the Olympics because of COVID. It's much worse than op because you see someone who sees those awards and you feel that it's not deserved because they actively stepped on people. The impact this creates therefore on government is that it creates a clear and present harm to the IOC. And that's a good thing. Why? Because if this benefits the IOC, firstly, this proves that it's likely to execute the policy properly. But secondly, all of our benefits imply including people within the sport. And noticeably, we prove that if it's better for the sport, it's better for the the optics of these individuals at large. It's better for the optics of these individual social movements within these countries. This is important because this allows the greater support for the Olympics and ensures the national athletes who have good behavior, are more supported financially, are able to live better lives. But most importantly, it generates better inclusivity. Obviously, opposition cannot gaslight you. Maybe the IOC is bad under the worst case of government, but I think it's much worse if you leave them to countries. Very proud to propose.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for that speech. Now calling on the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, you can be heard.
Okay. Take keywords in the chat. 3, 2, 1. 3 problems with the government case. 1 is that they assume the IOC is going to do this in a way that are perfect. And their only mechanism for this was that, well, there's going to be some form of backlash if they do things randomly, which I'm going to prove later as well, which does not engage within the unique context as to how the IOC act and why they do not have this incentive. The second thing to point out is their side says that our current mechanisms are insufficient, but this literally bites them back in their own foot because they say that, well, the reason that the IOC wants to do this in the first place, if there is large base support for this anyway. So it's unclear to me why exactly, if there already is large base support for this thing to happen in the first place, and for the IOC to care about this to a significant extent, this same thing doesn't apply for them to be then held accountable in court or through the trials, right? So this literally does not apply on their side. But the third thing to say here is that they don't necessarily engage as to how exactly what is the worst case of their side, because they can't assume that all these trials are going to be perfect. They don't necessarily engage as to how exactly what may happen if these things do not go as planned, if there are going to be some form of athletes who are still able to get away with these things. I think that's fundamentally the issue under their side, and they assume that it's going to be a perfect representation of how athletes are going to be held accountable. The first thing I'll talk about is protecting minorities, because they say this is extremely important. In PM, this is that this hurts minorities because you're able to compete against other people. This literally contradicts their own case, I want to point out, because they already talk about why people born in conservative areas cannot be held accountable for anti-LGBT rhetoric. But given that this is probably the vast chunk of people that we're talking about in this debate, it's unclear to what degree they actually receive any form of tangible benefit. So your entire case is speculative in this regard as to, I'm unsure as to what benefit they get. It's really marginal. Secondly, I also want to claim that this argument actually works against against their own case because they don't prove why this is going to be a perfect model. Like, bro, like obviously they're not going to randomly take minority athletes off. That's not what we have to support. What we are rather saying is that they're going to be more likely for, even if some minority athletes may do some form of controversial things, or they may do some form of things like supporting BLM protests publicly. Like, these are the types of things like to be cracked down on, not just randomly because they're black, so we're going to take them out. Like, that's not how it works. But I think they're unwilling to engage in the reality of their world, which is probably had to happen to a significant extent. I don't think they won't take the trade-off that this happens sometimes. But the second thing to point out here is that they just don't say why the IOC is likely to be a perfect actor when doing these things. It's unclear why they should be in charge of dictating these decisions. Their analysis was that the IOC will get significant amounts of backlash. It's extremely unclear to me why the IOC cares about backlash, because literally their case says that people still want to support athletes anyway, but then suddenly on the outside of the house, because people are now going to want to have some form of like pressure on the IOC, they're going to act in ways that are good. Only one of those things could be true. So what we're specifically saying here is that the IOC probably doesn't care about backlash, given that the Olympic is something that they're already seen as a event that people opt into, regardless of what nationality you're from. That all these things that already apply on their side still happen here. So I think the IOC is unable to care about backlash. But even in the best case, if they make this decision based off large public support, it's probably still controlled by a select few at the top. And even when there's best case where there's some form of reforms, this is the historical demographic of the IOC and the people in power. The people who are historically able to participate in these sports clubs were extremely wealthy. They had the leisure time to do so. They were top level investors who are people who are previously rich athletes already. And they're slow in responding to cultural shifts because these are all seen as like rich people at the top of the IOC already. So therefore, it's pretty illiberal in nature. The claim here is they won't do it in ways that are good. But even if it wasn't inherently discriminatory in the IOC, it was controlled by people in the West who are unlikely to be sympathetic towards the plight of less privileged athletes from developing countries in the first place, because IOC is like, you know, mostly like not owned by people in developing countries. So people within those positions of power never had the incentive to change or reform, because any form of protest or cancel movement was unlikely to have enough capital or media attention to sustain a long-term probe against them. Therefore, they were likely to act in ways that are bad. So they can't necessarily say that these things are good. What was the impact of this? Number one, we specifically told why things like bribing scandals, all these things could be used against those athletes, because those people that, per their own analysis, people with the huge amounts of power and influence within society would like to have that on either side. Now they were able to bribe the IOC into keep letting them keep their medals, whereas the athletes with less capital and those who are from like more minorities or less privileged were unlikely to be able to keep these medals, and therefore they were likely to be unfairly attacked and they lose the support. So therefore it creates more inequality under their side of the house. But the second clash here is about better sport, because I think the problem then is that they say, well, your side must support a comparative of individual countries. Like, bro, this is extremely uncharitable. If you assert that individual countries do not want to hold their own athletes accountable because of public image, then it's obviously far worse when countries know their own athletes can be attacked at any random time and have these medals stripped away by the IOC. So presumably you get less opt-in towards these things under their side of the house. But the second thing to note here is that if you're saying that these countries will probably want to like care about their athletes being here, I think what's more likely to happen under their side of the house is when they know that their athletes can be attacked at any random time, they're more likely to have severe crackdowns against those athletes to make sure that they do not say, for example, public statements that may be controversial, or they're going to be very like regulatory as to how those athletes actually reduces the autonomy of those athletes and the way for their fans to receive pride from them. And you decrease the form of any form of like social like benefit from the sport, as they want to say. Or the third reason here is that you probably get less opt-in towards a sport, which literally contradicts their own case. So therefore, we actually win on this clash. Before that, I'll take a POI.
Your case is contingent on a funny characterization of the IOC, but the baseline we explained is crime. How do you ensure Cleet Keller, a criminal who still was able to compete in the Olympics, was held accountable?
Cleet Keller was likely to be committing a crime. It's unclear as to why he won't be held accountable. It's unclear why the IOC is likely to hold him accountable before the people in his own country does. But number two, he did this thing like really recently. I think Cleet Keller was a long time case, like a long time ago. So it's unclear to me why this is something that these people can still participate in the Olympics. But the second note here is that they don't actually talk about how athletes are going to react to this. They just assume it's perfect and everyone will be okay with this. Given that they characterize these athletes as being inherently bad and against the integrity of the sport, they're likely to do things that are really bad in light of this. They're likely to lash out against these forms of things. They're likely to encourage violence per their own analysis that say these people are bad. It's unclear to me why they can't still use the pre-existing platforms that you have. Because even in their best case, you have a signaling effect. These people still have some form of capital. They still have the influence to tell their like supporters to do things that may be really bad, to reduce the efficacy of how exactly exactly you're going to regulate them to significant extent. Because if these people are going to be pissed off knowing that the one thing they had specifically had was then going to be cracked down on by the IOC, now they can't have these things in their best case, they're still going to act in ways that are really bad. But the second thing to say here is about deterrence. They say this acts as an incentive for athletes to not do bad things. So these people are still able to gain the gratification of winning those individual events. Even if you can't keep the medal, it's still in your mind that you were the best in the world, and therefore you're still like to hold on towards this platform. Also, if both sides were like it to be bad and these athletes were just really bad people, it's unclear to me why these people are going to suddenly change under their side of the house. But finally, they don't engage in this because we specifically told you why Cleat Keller, the example in the info slide, was someone who was an Olympic medalist a long time ago. The premise is that, well, the IOC should crack down on these things. They don't tell me why, but this is what their case supports. What we're specifically saying here is that this received no engagement from them, was that you continuously wanted to probe into the private lives of these athletes. Because if the IOC had the burden of actively policing the actions of athletes, then they have to continuously probe into the private lives to be able to gain maximum amounts of information and make a decision based off that. So we like to have less like a private lives for these athletes anyway, even if they're not inherently bad or we don't know anything about them, you are still likely to want to do this for the reason that now the burden is on you to do these things already. So even if you're not someone who's already committed a crime, the IOC now has the burden to look into your private life to see if you have committed a crime at any point in time. For all these reasons, you make life worse for athletes, you make the sport worse, and you just have a lot of people getting hurt by this. I think we're proud to oppose.
I thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition for that speech. Now calling on the government whip. Here.
Am I audible? Visible?
Yes, you are audible.
Hugh, I'll take my POS between 4 and 5 through chat. All right. Yeah. Same with David. I just like to say hello to all the people from Pisay watching me. I can't mention all your names. Oh, wait, I'll mention. Ali, Kyle again, Kikoy, Neil, Veronica, Naomi. I think that's everyone. Okay. So Irene and Rain. Okay. Hello. Okay. Start my speech in 3, 2, 1. So the only premise that's still standing from opposition is the IOC is bad and therefore it will be bad. So I have multiple responses to this. Let's jump straight into my issues. So firstly, where do we protect the integrity of the sport and of the IOC as a whole? And then secondly, where do we best protect athletes and why that's the most important thing? So they say that, the IOC is corrupt. But I want to note their comparative, which was the implicit comparative that they tried to make as a response to the POI. We can just ban these people from participating in the future. If that's true, then all of the harms of corruption exist under their side because they can also ban these people willy-nilly. So that's the first response. The second response is, it's unclear. This does not manifest in status quo. They don't give any structural reasons as to why that's true. But thirdly, and this is the converse, why is it not likely to be done comparatively? The first reason is that the IOC is on thin ice. So any form of backlash or any form of incorrectly doing this is going to further worsen their situation. They're already losing profits, so it's unlikely that it's likely that they're going to do this very, very carefully, and if and only if it's going to be beneficial for their survival in the worst case. But as an intuition pump, I want to note that as I point out, you can just ban the same minorities, but they don't, because even if they are corrupt, and this is the best case, the money and the image that they get from being the pinnacle of human condition outweighs the small gains of corruption. So this is unlikely. This is why it doesn't happen as much. So, and secondly, once you strip someone of your medals, you're likely to generate a lot of attention in the media. So there's a lot of scrutiny, and this is the difference, because this is something that happens publicly under their side. All of their mechanisms happen privately, and this is why it's not likely to happen then. So then this is the best case. So they say that people from conservative countries will not know what homophobia is and will, accidentally be homophobic. Like, one, this is largely unclear and asserted. But as we point out, they will not be punished for this because these are not laws in their countries. But then they say that, people that advocate for BLM are going to then be stripped of their medals. Like, people who advocate for progressive movements don't break laws in the first place. So you cannot symmetricize that everybody who has a political opinion will be stripped of their medal. The baseline is crime. The baseline is going to the Capitol riot, which is categorically different from a BLM protest. Don't let them get away with this BS, panel. So then, even in the instance where it won't be perfect, 4 things. The first is that this is still significantly better than the comparative. So where countries do this themselves, where they have an active incentive to let these things slide, it's significantly better. And the only response, by the way, from DLO was to say, no, dude, that's that's unfair without really giving us a reason as to why that's the case. But two, let's be very clear on the margin because they accuse us of being contradictory. As we point out, the margin in this debate is where these qualms to remove their medals can get through to the IOC, but can't get through through their national Olympic committees. So these are people all over the world, for example, protesting Keller's medal, who is an American, who will be protected by the American sporting committees, but will not be protected by the rest of the world and by the IOC as an extension. But thirdly, why will the IOC not be anti-poor in the worst extent? Because they love making good stories. They love milking rags to riches stories. So if they're corrupt, it's because it's in the pursuit of money. These people are money-making machines in terms of PR, especially because they've done the rags to riches story. But fourthly, as we point out, it's okay because even in that instance, the scrutiny still happens publicly. That's significantly better because, as we point out, most of these people, even if they are held accountable, are able to escape into other things post their careers. This is, and I'll further explain that in the second issue. But I'll take the worst case. What if this was actually just to benefit the IOC in the very, very worst case? I would say that that's still good because that means that the IOC gets to survive. As we point out, the IOC is already dying a slow death. It's losing a lot of money. So even if they do this to prioritize their survival, as we point out, they would only, in the worst case, they would only prosecute people who, for example, ride the bandwagon. So like people who are unpopular. That's still okay because the survival of the IOC is the prerequisite to the Olympics anyway as a whole. So even in that case, that's just the prerequisite for people to be able to compete, for people to be able to enjoy, like the thrill of the Olympics, and for athletes to be rewarded in the first place, which is like the prerequisite to everything else. Okay, given all of that, second issue, where do we protect athletes and people much better? And this is the important nuance because the accusation is you're not able to hold them accountable proactively. So notice that those are already existing laws, so those are like symmetric on either side of the house. But this is the nuance. Why does it have to be retrospective? So this is the nuance as to why active bans are not enough, and this is directly responsive to them. I want to note that the existence of their medals means that their ability to jump to another field is largely strong and possible. So if you're banned from a certain event, you can just shift through another event because you have a credibility of your medal, or you can do things like commentate on the same sport in a different league, or participate in it in a different league, precisely because even if you are banned for the Olympics, you're able to do things like jump ship to other fields, precisely because you still have that credibility. We explain that you explicitly take away that credibility in the sense, not only like in the literal sense that your medal is taken away, but also like in a signaling mechanism sense. But they say that therefore means that you have no active deterrence. Three things to this. One, we already explained why it creates a chilling effect. Two, even if you don't buy that, most athletes attend multiple. So there are four things here. One, most athletes spend multiple Olympics in their career. So stripping of their medal is the easiest way, for example, to give them a hard time, give them a lower seed, and all of those kinds of things. So I would say that even if we're not able to actively deter, at least you're able to respond retroactively. So for example, even if that's a very minute benefit, and we concede that because obviously bans are symmetric and we're talking about adding this extra layer of regulation, this allows their competitors who live with the dissonance of being beaten by a criminal, for example, to sleep at night. That allows people that have looked up and valorized these people to be able to not anymore have to reconcile the fact that they are people who are held to a high regard by society because they have a medal, but these people committed crimes at the same time. So people no longer have to live with that dissonance. That's an incredibly good thing. I know that it's a marginal thing, but it's something that doesn't exist under their side. But how will athletes see this? And this is the last thing. They say that one, it doesn't make sense to them, but obviously they connected their downfall to a medal in the best case. But the losing of the medal is also linked to bad behavior. So it's unlikely that they won't understand this. But secondly, they say that backlash is enough. If this is true, as we point out, at the very least, it's good that the IOC should be bandwagoning at the very worst case. That's good because if accountability is symmetric, then the IOC survival is increased under our side. That's good. That's the prerequisite for everything. But even if you don't buy that, 3 points of weighing. The first is that you just protect more people as a whole. So this looks like children and people in the country who I said valorize these people. You reconcile their active like cognitive dissonance, but more importantly, victims of similar crimes or victims of those crimes themselves. So people, the family members, for example, of the policemen who were killed in the Capitol riot protests. This is good. These are the most important people because one, these people are more in terms of scale. So you're just hurting one athlete at worst. You're actively there's an active harm that happens to all all of those other people who are victims of these crimes if you don't hold them accountable. But B, you encourage carefulness of behavior. So even if this is an overstep, this is just good in terms of the fact that, you know, that Olympics is one of the most televised things in the world. It's good if people are overly careful in the worst case. But thirdly, the utility of medals are oftentimes based anyway on how people see them. So this is the Abhinav argument that we assign value to things. If someone is public enemy number one and they have a medal, that creates a lot of dissonance within people. That just ruins the credibility of the Olympics, because even if you're not able to hold people accountable, that's the most important thing. Proud to propose.
I think the government whip for that speech, now calling on the opposition whip. Here.
Thank you. Pronouns are he, him. You can ask me POIs via voice. Can I clarify so far? Am I audible and clear?
Yes, you're audible and clear.
Thank you very much. Okay, friends, I'm going to go through a few clashes in this debate so far and tell you why we on the opposition bench have won these clashes. And firstly, a quite minor clash in regards to which side of the house is going to be worse for minorities. We tell you that under their side, it's going to be bad because social checks and balances, like we tell you that like social checks and balances should not be handled by the IOC, because you have those things that have been brought up by my previous speakers, the L and the DLO, such as like bribing scandals that were much, much worse. Regardless of what government tries to tell you about the IOC being on thin ice and under the public eye. The point is, the decision to remove these medals was made privately. It's unclear to me why, despite this also being the case about the IOC being under the public eye and being on thin ice, despite this also being the case in status quo, and that like the IOC is still a corrupt organization under status quo, why suddenly for this specific issue, the IOC will then bow down suddenly to these existing calls against corruption? We tell you that they are going to be less likely to respond to social change as opposed to the people on the ground, that the platform is going to be worse for judging social benefit and social bads simply because of their nature as like some elite group, and then now make the comparative. Well, under our side, we tell you that like that without having to remove medals, we tell you that the comparative that exists which is that like people, the fans are going to have to like stop supporting these people who have come out as like people with like bad behavior, that sponsors are not going to want to sponsor these people anymore, and that also that the media is going to paint them in a bad light already. We tell you that these things are going to be better avenues for judging social justice and social change because it is more democratic and not less elitist than the government's mechanism. Next, on the clash of which side of the house is going to be better for the athletes' behavior. On their side, we tell you that like athletes are not likely to follow their disciplinary action simply because firstly the IOC is corrupt, that people are not going to listen to them and understand why they did something wrong. Therefore, they're going to be less likely from their mistakes simply because they have this feeling of I'm against the bad guys, so therefore I feel in some way I'm somewhat justified and I'm pretty good because I'm against like this corrupt organization. I'm standing up against these big bullies. The government tells you that government says that like people care about medals because that's what they're competing for. We tell you that like, they don't explain exactly why they want these medals and why they're competing for them in the first place. We tell you and we give you this explanation, this unique analysis, that what athletes want is first the clout, which in the form of like fans, money in the form of sponsors, and like their legacy, which is painted by the media. We tell that all these things happen under our side as well. It's not mutually exclusive, and they don't explain uniquely why removing these medals is something that is uniquely the most important action to take in this debate, and why the benefits from removing medals are mutually exclusive to their side. I'll take you in a moment. Next, we tell you that like athletes are going to act worse under their side because they're going to be pissed off as they're seen as being bad actors. We say that they're going to hold on to these platforms, and we say that the backlash from these athletes is going to come from a place of like, oh, I was unfairly robbed of this medal, as opposed to, oh, I am getting public backlash because I'm a bad person. We tell you that under our side, our alternative is like things like media calls out, or like sponsors stop sponsoring, and like fans don't support them, and these things like actually affect them because like when the fans or the media sends a message, it sends a message of like the people have spoken and they have spoken against you, as opposed to like, oh, this big corrupt organization is just trying to put me down. We feel that this loss of support makes them recognize their mistake and reconsider their actions, and it also thinks that the loss of sponsors actually affects their bottom line, and they're more likely to then care about these issues, and then more likely to understand why they've done something wrong, and therefore improve their behavior. We feel that this is mutually exclusive to our side because because of two reasons. Firstly, they feel oppositional to the IOC, so they feel justified and they don't learn under their side. We feel that like fans may also still support them for like standing up to the IOC, for example. We feel that like even if you don't buy this argument, then the creation of these moral gray areas allows for this misinterpretation. Compare this to on our side, we're quite clearly telling you that the like media or the fans are going to like stop support for them. Next, we tell you that like taking away medals under their side, like the reason why this is mutually exclusive is that taking away medals under their side is going to lead to things like complacency, because the idea is that justice is already served, so there's less need for other things, for like people or for sponsors or for the media. If you try to claim that people's justice is like that this people's justice is not mutually exclusive, the comparative you must understand is that people will feel is that under our side only will people feel the need to take it upon themselves and actually speak up against this. Yes, if you want.
Okay, this assumes that all these methods are exclusive. As you point out, the IOC does this when all of those mechanisms kick in, so they're only bandwagoning, responding to public opinion. You literally have to defend not taking their medals away, even though that's the popular public opinion.
Yeah, the reason why we feel this is mutually exclusive to our side is that under your side, where you like take away, where the IOC takes away their medals, is that firstly it's going to lead, as I've just explained to you, to complacency. The IOC has just taught this justice, and so the rest of the people do not any longer have to continue. And under your side as well, people are going to be oppositional to the IOC, where the IOC is already a bad actor, and they're not the ones who should be dispensing justice in this case. So under your side, the IOC tries to dispense this justice, and the athletes are going to be feeling against this. They are likely going to have like some form of support from people who are already fans of those athletes. If we justify that like they're oppositional against the IOC, and therefore under your side only, are you going to have like this moral gray area where people are allowed to like misinterpret these things and like then say like, oh, but my athlete is still a good person because they're standing up against the IOC? This does not happen under our side. Next, we tell you that we also win the principal clash. They would tell you it should not be a case where you mix professional and personal life. We tell you that like they pretty much abandon their entire principle and like Deputy Prime Minister's speech. That is worse off when that medal is going to be seen as like moral signaling as opposed to like being based off of merit. And also like just the very nature that this decision was made privately by this elitist group, the IOC, is not going to like win them the debate on this on this principle clash, because that they lose out on that principle by not being democratic and by not actually like being good judges for the social change. Next, in regards to like setting role models and being role models and setting examples, on their side, their entire like idea of like setting good examples is contingent upon like the characterization that fans care about the medals and not the athlete. Until this is not true when people already support like athletes without medals, and it's not true when the audience look towards these athletes' character and like view them as like characters or like individuals that they support as people, regardless of their medals, like if they lose, etc. Like their side fundamentally supports the premise that morality is associated with prizes and awards. We feel this is simply not true, because under our side, athletes are going to be rejected as role models because of our mechanism. The fans don't represent that the fans don't support them anymore. The media doesn't pay them in a good light, and the sponsors also like they no longer like deck them out with their gear or make them look good. We tell them that under our side, medals are no longer the be all and end all. Like this thing about the dissidence of like medals being given to bad people is brought up by government and then false. Like we tell that under our side, we're able to teach kids that there's more to life than these medals themselves. We reduce the prioritization of medals, so the kids can also like win the crowd or like win the principle or like win the hearts. We tell that only under our side, these kids are going to learn to grow up to be better individuals. Note that on government, this mechanism of taking away awards does not exist in other fields or other institutions, right? Schools don't have these mechanisms to remove these medals from kids. We tell that girls' narrative of a medal now being seen as the one thing that shows your prowess in society, and that your success in like both your personal life and social approval and professional life is going to be rewarded with medals, right? Contrast this to our side, where we tell you that like medals are given meritocratically and like based on their like accomplishments in the sport, but only under our side do we tell you that like those athletes are taken down through our mechanism, where the fans don't give them any support, where the media doesn't support them anymore, and the sponsors are no longer helping them, like supporting them and giving them money. For these reasons, we are most proud to propose. Thank you.
I think the opposition whip for that speech. Just a general reminder for everyone, please take note of the time so that you don't go over it. Finally, to close the debate for the opposition half, I now call on the
All right. 3, 2, 1. The case of the government sounds good in theory, but specifically if you look at every part of their model, there are just things that fundamentally do not work. Because their best case was assuming that this process was going to be in the best interest of everyone. Like given that the IOC was going to make fundamentally good decisions at every step, that just because this was likely to have huge amounts of public pressure on them to do so, given that this has historically failed in order to produce good decisions from the IOC in multiple ways. I'm just not sure as to why the IOC should be in charge of dictating these decisions towards a large extent, and to say that the significant amount of backlash and public pressure were likely to change them. As we characterized you pretty clearly, it was unclear why the IOC is then going to just succumb towards all of these sorts of things, as seeing as there's historical reasons as to why they don't. There's historical reasons as to why they were likely to be controlled by privileged individuals that did not have the capacity to engage with these things. They were pretty illiberal, they were pretty conservative, necessarily meaning that all the forms of backlash were unlikely to exist regardless. But the second thing to point out here was that their premise of how exactly backlash is going to lead towards good outcomes because we're able to pressure them works against their side as well, given that you specifically say that these people were having like huge amounts of public support if they did not have that medal taken away from them. So it's unclear to me why exactly the public support for them to have their medal taken away was then going to outweigh the public support for these athletes that already pre-existed there. So their side was unclear as to showing why that backlash was likely to lead towards good outcomes and making them good decisions. Well, obviously they pushed the worst case comparative on the outside. We specifically had to support these where they said the outside necessarily needs to support like these people just randomly taking away medals. Like this is also untrue for the reasons that we've already stated. That it was unlikely you take a medal away from a minority just because they were a minority, but likely because they would make a decision that was seen to be like unlikely to be profitable, or that was unlikely to be within the favor and interest within the conservative people that were controlling the IOC at the top. They never engaged within the likely case of their side of the house, and therefore they had to fail on whether this was going to be an effective action. But the second thing to point out was why exactly existed on the outside of the house. We said pre-existing mechanisms for accountability were more than sufficient. This is also where their case falls, because if it is true that there was large public support to take their medal away, then it also had to be true that there was large public support to take them to court. Their assertion here was that, well, it's non-exclusive to be able to do these things. Number one, obviously to some degree, it was going to be somewhat better on the outside when you were able to hold them accountable, given that we already explained to you why it was going to lead towards complacency, in which they necessarily see if you see one person already having taken their medal away, the justice was already done, and therefore you had less capacity for you to push for other things as well. But the second thing to point out here was that even if they were able to have this thing happen on both sides, they never engaged within the unique harms of our side as to why exactly doing this was likely to be a bad decision. Number one, the athletes were going to just be really mad about this decision. If they had incentives to use their platform for bad things, as the Gov characterizes, it's completely unclear as to why exactly they can't do this on either side. And it was likely to be true that when they had their medal taken away, they were going to lash out in ways that were bad. They were going to have some form of backlash towards these things, and they never engaged within this harm that was pretty clearly characterized on the outside of the house, and they had to agree with these things going to be like these athletes going to act in ways that were worse. But the second thing to point out here was that we specifically also told you why the media wants to continuously probe into the private lives of athletes in order to gain information. And notice that this engaged within their best case was that specifically some people had to, in order to get more information about them in order for you to necessarily make a decision as to whether you want to take their medal away. But even if you didn't buy this, I just think there's multiple reasons why your case doesn't work. And so specifically showing things like how you're able to create unique forms of deterrence. Number one, we specifically told that even they concede to this was that these athletes were still able to hold on to some degree of fame already, given that even if you take the medal away, people still acknowledge that Kate Keller won the Olympics multiple times. That specifically this was going to be a performative action that didn't literally generate lots of positive externalities on their side. But number two, even if this was a signaling effect towards other people wanting to hold them accountable as well, what we characterized you already was that there already was large degrees of support for wanting to hold them accountable, for the IOC to care about this in the first place. So literally our contextualization comes analytically prior to theirs, because you have to weigh this up. The final thing to say here is the worst case on the outside of the house, even if these people still had to keep on their medals and they were really, really bad people who committed crimes, I think we are still okay with that in the worst case, given that these people were going to act in ways that were far worse if this medal was then taken away from them, which reduced the opt-in towards this sport, which actually get less people wanting to then opt in towards this sport because they knew that those medals could be taken away from them at any time. For all these reasons, their side was ineffective, their side was actively counterproductive. What we specifically told you unique harms of taking away their medal. We're very proud to win this debate.
I think the opposition reply for that speech. To finally close off this debate, I call on the government reply. Hear, hear.
Right. I was about to say POIs through voice, but this is reply, so remember. Putting in 3, 2, and 1. The first thing I'll do is deal with the qualms about implementation. Next, I'm going to be talking about legitimacy and then synthesizing the problem of deterrence. Firstly, on implementation, they say that the IOC is bad. We dealt with this in 2 dynamic ways. The first thing we dealt with is that maybe the IOC is bad in terms of other things like embezzlement. Maybe it's things like, scandaling money. But this is not true for medals because the medals are specifically very publicized. These are things that are very explicit. It is the main thing that the IOC gives out. It's unclear as to why this does not apply. The second thing that we dealt with is that the IOC needs international legitimacy. They don't want to be oppressive. They don't want to be seen as the bad guy. And given that we already proved that there are some things that are just unanimously frowned upon, it is unclear as to why this harm even occurs in the first place. So obviously, even if the IOC overall is a dubious actor, this factor cannot be a significant one, and it obviously is not true and does not hold water in this round. We say on the converse that they're likely going to be implemented in a particularly good way because of, firstly, backlash. Like as we point out, the worst case, even if they are corrupt, then this operates on mob rule. So this will at least ensure it won't be overrun by privileged people, because if Cleat Keller goes to the Capitol riots and everyone hates the fact that the Capitol riots happened, this is public opinion that isn't necessarily popular, and therefore they want to ride the waves. They want to go with that as well. Because secondly, they operate at a loss due to countries not wanting to host, especially in new COVID. There's an additional reason given at extension, no response other than op-whip, just asserting that it's significant. Then they say at op-reply, oh, it creates complacency. Notice that this is met and asserted at op-reply, but secondly, it does not matter because already does enough to make sure they don't have a career somewhere else because they no longer have that credibility because you already give them that stain. So sure, it might not be perfect. It might take a bit longer at worst, but it's not going to be batshit crazy to the extent that it's actively harmful because they know that they're on thin ice and they can't just say, we can just ban them. This is important because even if the IOC is bad, the comparative, i.e. countries, is worse. Their responses are just to say it's uncharitable and we can just ban them. But banning is symmetric, but they are still recognized because they still have the medals in opposition. I think it's completely fair, secondly, because political capital is limited. Like you cannot ban whole countries because you get the same harms of corruption. But the reason why it's worse is because you have an active incentive to shield athletes because they're the local bets to get the gold, because they have lawyers, money, because they have social capital from fans. So it's better on Gov because the IOC is much more asymmetric on these athletes. The second thing I want to talk about then is on the basis of legitimacy. So they say oh wait, I'm so sorry. Okay, so the first thing that they say is just that there is a distinction between the the personal lives of these people and the professional lives of these people. The first thing that to note is that it's categorically different at the point at which these people are public figures, and therefore people have a lot of respect for the kinds of opinions that they give. And therefore, at the point at which you have these people as public figures and therefore have a lot of externalities in terms of that, you cannot shield these people, obviously. The second thing that they say is that athletes will get mad. It's uncomparative because in status quo, people are mad that racists and criminals have medals. There's a bigger form of backlash because this transgresses societal norms. Meanwhile, on government, we have a lot of harms that they don't respond to. The harms to integrity, that they make competition much worse because they're competing with someone who makes them feel unsafe. They feel it is unfair that someone who is discriminatory against their identity is at the top of the sport and worsens the form of competition. So this doubles down on discrimination they face. But secondly, the harm to the sport, that they worsen the perception of the public towards the sport because you see a white supremacist, a criminal is on the pedestal, and they see the sport does not have any integrity whatsoever. So they gave two contentions in the synthesis. If their contention was that people can have distinctions in their lives, that does not apply to medal-winning athletes who at that point are public figures. If their contention was that the judgment would be unfair, I implore you to think why this would be the case. Because some things are just unanimously condemned, such as capital rights being symbols of racism. It's unclear why they would be disagreement in those instances. So this was framed out from the beginning. Ram set up this proves his contention. In conclusion, it is legitimate because it causes externalities. Lastly, on deterrence. Noticeably, we get no response to this, and that's half the round gone for them. They just say backlash, we take that out. So what do we say? We say there's an individual deterrent from doing bad things because they massively care about that medal. Op just says going to the Olympics is already a feat. They don't care that much about the medal, but you go to the Olympics to get that medal. You only get recognized, get financial support, get clout when you get that medal. Your legacy is secured when you do win. Even at worst, being the most charitable, it's the fact that people won't concretize their bigotry. That even if Cleat Keller is racist, it's the fact that in this world in particular, he wouldn't have caused an active physical harm out of that racism, and that's already a good thing, especially when public figures themselves provide legitimacy. Outside of the fact that we already proved that you get internal reform of Olympic committees within these countries, this is important because by virtue of insufficient response, the harms still accrue on their side of the house. They still have public figures giving harmful movements legitimacy. They still have racists getting away with it scot-free. By virtue of them not willing to engage with the context, the frame and the the contention to be fried in the round clearly beside advances to the quarterfinal. Try to propose.
I think the government reply for that speech. That wraps up this debate. I now invite both houses to virtually cross the house. The panelists, please stay. Everyone else, please